Berlinski will question Professor Miller, and then Professor Miller will question Mr. Berlinski.
Should I go first?
Yes.
Professor Miller, would you agree with the statement that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution? It's very often quoted.
The statement you're making is made by Theodosis Dobzhansky.
It's often attributed to Ernst Mayr also.
Fair enough. And in a simple way, so I don't have word games played on me. No, I would not agree with it. I think there are things in biology that are perfectly sensible, even if evolution is not correct. However, our understanding of the interrelationships between organisms, phylogeny, and natural history does indeed only make sense in light of evolution.
But in terms of your own very fine work in cell biology, evolutionary theory plays no role whatsoever.
Does evolutionary theory play a role in my work?
Proton transport.
Thank you for complimenting my work. The answer is no, that's not correct. The reason for that is a few years ago, an investigator discovered a very interesting microorganisms of prokaryote called prochloron. Prochloron turned out to be the very first prokaryote, organism without a nucleus, discovered that had both chlorophyll A and B. This suggests very strongly that in an evolutionary sense, prochloron is the evolutionary ancestor of the chloroplasts of higher plants. This organism was sent to me because of the kind of structural work I do with the idea, let's put it to the test. Because what we did in my lab was to investigate the structure of its photosynthetic membranes, and lo and behold, we found that they were enormously similar to higher plant chloroplasts. If they had been dissimilar, it might have been an argument against evolution. It turned out not to be the case. I'm persuaded that you've been invigorated by the shade of Charles Darwin. But the fact is that in your published scientific papers, the term evolution occurs as frequently as the term Presbyterian, which is to say not at all. Well, I have to tell you once again, sir, you are wrong on the fact.
All right.
None of my 75-plus published referee papers uses the term Presbyterian. At least 3 of them use the term evolution.
I stand corrected.
The details
matter.
matter.
75 to 3 against the usefulness of evolution in your own scientific life. Let's leave that question aside and let's pass to another one, since I don't see any way of resolving that particular issue.
I still reject it on the terms. You say evolution is not useful. The very reason why we study the translocation of proteins in lower organisms, such as yeast, is because we believe we learn something about how our own cells work by studying other organisms, and the underpinning assumption for that is, in fact, evolutionary biology.
Nonsense, and you know it. You study it because it's an interesting and accessible question. That's the only
well, sir, the only thing I can tell you is if it really was nonsense, the significant sections I write in the end of my grant applications to the National Institutes of Health would no longer be successful.
Could well be. Let's turn to the question I so vainly tried to prompt an answer from Dr. Scott. How many morphological changes do you think were required to affect the transition those charts of yours were sent to document?
Okay, now I will give you a straight answer. And the straight answer is that when you look at 2 species that are separated by 5 million years of geological time, the number of changes must be very, very large.
Give us an estimate.
However, recent studies of speciation, and I'm sorry to pick this specific species, but it's relevant to your question. Recent studies of speciation in sunflowers have shown conclusively that a new species can be established in terms of the speciation isolation mechanism with as few as 10 genetic changes.
Yes,
that's your answer.
I've read the same science papers you have, but those are very close. A dog-like mammal and a whale are very far.
That's right. And the other end of the room is very far away, and it should not surprise you that I get there with 1 step at a time, and that's what we're talking about.
Can I conclude that you refuse? No matter the number I give you, you will neither assent nor disagree with the number. If I say there are 100,000 morphological changes required to take a dog-like mammal living on the land to a whale,
sorry. Yes, I will answer that. That's way too high. We believe that organisms, well, I shouldn't say we believe. The good genetic evidence is that there are about 100,000 genes in human beings. I would best guess there's somewhat fewer in whales. What you're telling me is to change from one similar organism, an organism that looks more like a whale than any terrestrial animal that has ever lived, to a whale that looks more like a terrestrial animal than every whale has ever lived, would require every gene to change.
No, I haven't talked about genes.
No, you asked me for a number, and I said on that basis,
morphological change.
On that basis, 100,000 is too high.
All right, 50,000?
My turn. Okay. Now, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You have said again and again and again the transitions are missing. And I hope no one in the audience missed the fact that Dr. Scott pointed out that the transition from reptiles to mammals, and Looking around the room, I see I'm surrounded by mammals. This should be a point of interest to us. That transition is exceedingly well documented. Now, once again, you said all the transitionals are missing, and I'm confused. If this transition is very well documented, how can you on the same face say they're all missing?
You know very well I didn't say that. I agree that the late reptile to mammal sequence is well documented. No question about it.
Okay, let me go a little further. Horses and elephants. I picked these organisms because they're large, because they're recently evolved, and because they are recent. We've got lots of fossils. They're easy to pick out. The fossil record of horses and elephants is extremely well documented. Now, you said at the other end of the table you deny that descent with modification is correct. So here's what I'd like to know.
I said I
yes,
didn't believe
you said
it.
I'm not convinced by it.
That's
I don't.
I
believe, sir, you did.
I said I'm not convinced.
So here's my question. If not descent with modification, please tell me your explanation for the temporal appearance of these extremely closely related, in morphological terms, organisms over time.
Okay, 2 points. First of all, I neither affirmed nor denied descent with modification. I said I have no opinion. I don't happen to have an opinion on that issue. It's vexed, in my opinion. Second of all, you have chosen three, and the only three examples in the fossil record where there's a plausible Darwinian sequence. The dog-like mammal to whale sequence, the elephant sequence, and the horse sequence.
Are you absolutely sure I can't pick up a fourth planet?
No, of course not. Each one is seriously questioned in the literature. The elephant
could you point out for the benefit of the audience what the question is? You said they're seriously questioned in the literature.
The question is, do we have a plausible sequence of morphological changes that lead to the late fossil form from the early fossil form by a route that makes morphological or
And I would argue,
sense?
yes, we do, and I hope you've read Bruce McFadden's marvelous book.
It's an excellent book, and
it's an excellent book, and he has put enormous effort into documenting those changes. So in legal terms, sir, case closed. We got it.
No, it's not closed. This isn't scientific argument. This is mere rhetoric. The horse sequence has proved vexed to everyone who looks at it, and the term of choice is that it's an astonishingly bushy sequence. We don't
Please
know.
Please explain the problem. I'm waiting for the answer.
When you look at
the
bushy
fossil
sequence is.
Yeah, this is a term that's occurred very often in literature. When we look at the horse sequence, we have dozens and dozens of species entering the record suddenly and departing from the record suddenly, just as abruptly as they entered. We do not really know whether the modern horse has ancestral patterns with the dozens of other species that we find in the fossil record.
So what that means is that you hold open. Sure, go ahead.
If we look closely at some of the amazing structures, for example, we find it very difficult. We find it very difficult to find specific antecedents. The more we study such structures, the less plausible it is that they have an ancestral pattern.
Let me suggest to the audience that what Dr. Berlinski just said is in fact not correct. And I can recommend articles and books in which you can find not only a series of transitional forms, but also good evolutionary morphologic explanations for it. And here's the question that I have for you. Once again, to someone who advocates, another question, to someone who advocates intelligent design.
I don't.
The fact, to someone who advocates intelligent design, does the sequence of these organisms in the fossil record simply mean that the intelligent designer was incompetent, he kept making things and they went extinct, or that he was restless, I try this, I'll try that, I'll try the other thing, or does it mean that in fact these organisms are related with by descent with modification?
No idea. I mean, it's not a question I'm prepared to answer one way or another. I don't see why I'm obliged to answer that. I'm coming here under the large tent of objurgation. I find scientific flaws with the Darwinian theory. I don't have a replacement.
Okay. The point that I think is extremely significant is in this case, one side argued from authentic evidence and the other side said it's not enough to convince me. And I think that's a good way to end the discussion.